The Legend's Shadow. The old high school football stadium, a skeleton of rust and peeling paint, was haunted by a single ghost, Marcus Thorne. Not the living, breathing man pacing the sidelines, but the legend he once was. The one they still talked about in the barbershops and on the front porches of this tired little town. The man who, with a football in his hands, was a tornado in cleats, a force of nature that tore through defenses and electrified every single person in the bleachers. That was 20 years ago. Now, the stadium bleachers were mostly empty, save for a few parents clutching thermoses and the occasional stray dog. Marcus, his face now etched with lines of experience and a permanent weariness in his eyes, was a shadow of his former self. His uniform was no longer a jersey with his name and number, but a well-worn windbreaker. The roar of the crowd had been replaced by the shrill whistle of his own making and the hopeful, sometimes clumsy movements of a team of teenage boys. They weren't superstars, they were the underdogs, a ragtag bunch of kids with more heart than skill. But Marcus saw something of himself in them. He saw the fire, the same raw hunger for a victory he never fully got to taste. He taught them the fundamentals with a patience that belied the fury he kept bottled up inside. He didn't just teach them to run plays, he taught them to understand the game, to anticipate, to think 3 steps ahead. He taught them to play with a purpose that went beyond a mere win. For Marcus, this wasn't just a job. It was a form of penance, a way to make peace with the career that had been ripped away from him in one single catastrophic moment. He could still feel the phantom pain in his knee, a dull throb that was a constant reminder of the hit that had ended everything. The doctors had called it a freak accident, but Marcus had always felt there was something more to it, a whisper of a memory, a flash of a face. The face of his closest friend and rival, Chris, standing a little too close, a smile a little too wide right before the impact. He'd never been able to prove it, and the doubt had festered for 2 decades. This season, the stake that made him both proud and frustrated. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and the distant promise of autumn. He was so lost in thought that he didn't hear the footsteps behind him until a voice, smooth and confident, cut through the quiet afternoon. "Well, well, look who's still playing in the dirt." The voice was a ghost, a sound from a past he had tried so hard to bury. He turned slowly, the motion deliberate, controlled. Chris stood there, just a few feet away, a stark contrast to Marcus's lived-in grittiness. Chris was all sharp lines and expensive fabrics, a charcoal gray suit that seemed to have been tailored to project a sense of power. His smile was easy, almost too perfect, and his eyes, a cool blue, held a calculating glint that Marcus knew all too well. "Chris," Marcus said, the name feeling like a dry stone in his mouth. "Didn't think I'd see you here. Shouldn't you be off at some fancy fundraiser?" Chris chuckled, the sound devoid of warmth. He took a few steps forward, his polished leather shoes crunching on the gravel. "Just came to check out the competition. Heard your little team is actually decent. A bit of a shock, to be honest. I figured you'd have given up on the whole coaching thing by now. Some of us actually care about the kids, Chris, not just the scoreboard." Chris's smile tightened, a flicker of genuine annoyance crossing his face before it was quickly masked. "Tough words from a man who never made it to the big leagues. We both know you'd be sitting in my office if things had gone differently for you." The words were a direct jab, a blade twisted into an old wound. Marcus felt the familiar phantom pain in his knee, a dull ache that resonated with the memory of the hit. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay calm. He wasn't a 20-year-old kid anymore. He had learned the hard way that emotion was a weakness, and Chris had always been an expert at exploiting weakness. "I'm right where I'm supposed to be," Marcus replied, his voice low and steady. "Teaching these kids to play with honor, something you wouldn't know a thing about." Chris let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Honor? That's what you tell." Motion of feigned indifference. "It's a dog-eat-dog world, Marcus. But hey, it's good to see you. Don't be too surprised when my team hands you a loss so bad, you'll wish you'd never picked up a whistle again." With that final, chilling promise, Chris turned and walked away. Marcus stood there for a long time, watching his old friend's retreating figure. The anger was a burning coal in his gut, but beneath it was something colder and more dangerous, a new, terrifying certainty. The hit that had ended his career wasn't an accident. It was a choice, a deliberate act of betrayal. And now, as Chris's expensive car pulled out of the parking lot, Marcus knew what he had to do. This wasn't just about winning a football game. This was about settling a debt, a cold and calculated act of vengeance that had been a long time coming. He hadn't just been coaching these boys to win. He had been training for this moment all along. The next to the underdogs. The next practice felt different. The air was charged, not just with the usual competitive energy, but with a new, somber weight. Marcus gathered the team in the center of the field, the silence of the late afternoon punctuated only by the rustle of leaves and the distant chirping of crickets. He looked at each of them, not as players, but as boys standing on the cusp of manhood, each with his own hopes and fears. "All right, listen up," Marcus began, his voice low but carrying. "I'm going to tell you a story. It's not a happy one, but it's a real one. It's my story." He took a deep breath, the words a bitter pill on his tongue. He spoke of his days as a star quarterback, of the deafening roar of the crowd, of the promises of a future that seemed boundless. He painted a picture of a young man who had it all: talent, fame, and a shot at the NFL. Then he spoke of the hit, a bone-crushing collision that had ended it all in an instant. He described the pain, the doctor's words, and the slow, agonizing realization that his dream was gone forever. To stop you from reaching your goal. My friend Chris is that person. He's the coach of the team we're playing in the final, and he's the person I suspect of ending my career. He paused, letting the revelation sink in. The shock on their faces was palpable. They had known there was history, but this was a whole new level of personal animosity. "He's not just a rival," Marcus said, his voice hardening with a cold resolve. "He is my opponent. And this game is not just about a championship. It's about honor. It's about showing that you can win the right way, that you can stand tall and fight with everything you have, even when the world tries to knock you down." The boys looked at each other, a new fire igniting in their eyes. This wasn't just a game to them anymore. It was a crusade. It was a chance to fight for their coach's honor, for a justice that had been denied to him for years. Marcus saw it in their faces, in the tight set of their jaws, in the way they stood a little taller. He had expected their sympathy, but what he got was their unwavering resolve. "So, from now on," Marcus said, his gaze locking with each of them, "we don't just run plays. We run with a purpose. We don't just block. We protect what's ours. We don't just win. We win for a reason. And we're going to do it the right way. No shortcuts, no cheating. We are going to win with heart, with skill, and with the kind of honor that he could never buy. You with me?" A unified chorus of "Yes, coach!" echoed across the field, the sound filled with a raw intensity that had never been there before. Marcus felt a surge of emotion he hadn't experienced in years. The wound of the past was still there, but for the first time, it felt like it was beginning to heal. He had made a promise to his team, and in doing so, he had rediscovered his own purpose. The game was on, and this time, he wasn't just playing for himself. He was playing for a dream he was passing on, and a justice he was finally offer. Congratulations. "I'm just calling to make you an offer," Chris continued, his voice dropping a notch, the pretense of politeness gone. "Your star running back, the kid with the speed, we'd like him on our team. A scholarship to a better high school, maybe a little something for his family. He's got potential, and we'd hate to see it wasted on a dead-end team." The air in the room went cold. Marcus's hand gripped the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. This was Chris's game. He didn't just beat you, he dismantled you from the inside out. He used money and influence to corrupt, to sow seeds of doubt and disloyalty. "He's not for sale, Chris," Marcus said, his voice a low growl, "and neither is my team." Chris laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Everything's for sale, Marcus. You just need to find the right price. Think about it. We could save you a lot of trouble. You can go back to your quiet little life, and I can get on with winning." Marcus hung up without another word. His blood ran hot. It was a clear act of sabotage, a move designed not just to take away his best player, but to prove that Chris held all the cards. He walked out to the backyard, the cool night air doing little to calm the fire in his veins. He looked at the quiet stars and felt a profound sense of isolation. The next day, it began. It wasn't just a phone call, it was a whisper campaign. Rumors started to circulate through the small town. Anonymous posts on the local online forum accused Marcus of mistreating his players, of running them too hard, and of questionable coaching ethics. A local sports reporter, one with close ties to Chris, wrote a column subtly questioning the team's unusual winning streak and alluding to undisclosed advantages. One of the parents approached Marcus after practice, his face a mix of concern and suspicion. "Coach, is everything okay? We've been hearing things. About the team, about you. Just rumors, of course, but it's making people a little nervous." Marcus forced a smile, a brittle mask over his rage. "Just noise, Mr. Davis. We're a threat now, and some people don't like that." But the noise was starting to get louder. It was a slow, deliberate attack. It was a tense affair. The usual chatter was gone, replaced by a quiet, focused anxiety. The boys were running a passing drill when it happened. A new player, a kid who had transferred from out of town and was still trying to find his footing, went up for a high pass. He landed awkwardly, a sickening crunch echoing across the silent field, followed by a guttural cry of pain. Marcus felt his heart seize in his chest. It was a sound he knew all too well, a memory that had been locked away in a dark corner of his mind for 20 years. He sprinted onto the field, the ghost of his own injury a cold hand on his spine. He knelt beside the boy, a young man named Tommy, whose face was a mask of shock and agony. He checked the knee, the swollen joint a chilling replica of the one that had ended his own career. It was a serious sprain, maybe worse. Tommy's season was over. As the paramedics loaded the boy onto a stretcher, a wave of familiar despair washed over Marcus. The sight of Tommy's crestfallen face, the look of a dream being snatched away, was a mirror of his own past. He stood on the sidelines, his own knee throbbing with a phantom pain he hadn't felt in years. The memory of the college championship game, the deafening roar of the crowd, the final play, the blinding pain. It all came rushing back with a raw, visceral force. He was back on that field. the cheers of the crowd a distant hum. The ball was in his hand, the goal line in sight. But he wasn't alone. Chris, his best friend, was supposed to be blocking for him. But instead, Chris had stumbled, a clumsy, seemingly innocent fall that had left a gaping hole in the line. A defensive player had burst through, a blur of motion and malice, and Marcus had gone down, his knee twisting in an agonizing, unnatural way. Now, standing on this high school field, watching a young boy's dreams being wheeled away, the old doubts became a cold, hard certainty. The freak accident had never been an accident. Chris's clumsy fall, his too wide smile just before the impact of that failure. This was no longer just about winning a football game. This was personal. This was about honor, about justice, and about settling a score that had been festering for 20 long years. The unraveling. The night after Tommy's injury was a restless one for Marcus. He sat alone in his living room, the quiet of his house a stark contrast to the storm raging inside his mind. He couldn't sleep. The image of the twisted knee and the sound of the boy's cry replayed in his head, a relentless, painful loop. Chris's voice, his casual admission, echoed in the silence. Sometimes you have to make hard choices, just like I did. The words were no longer a vague taunt. They were a confession. Marcus knew he couldn't prove anything without solid evidence. The hit had happened 2 decades ago, in front of a stadium full of people who saw it as a routine play. The game footage was likely long gone, but something nagged at him, a forgotten detail, a half-remembered moment from that fateful day. He closed his eyes, forcing his mind to go back, to relive the final seconds of his career. He remembered the play call, the roar of the crowd, the snap of the ball. He remembered Chris standing beside him, a flicker of something strange in his eyes. And then he remembered the sudden, awkward fall, a motion that seemed too deliberate, too perfect to be an accident. He also remembered Chris's expression immediately after the hit, not one of concern or shock, but a fleeting look of cold, grim satisfaction. Suddenly a different memory surfaced, one he had buried deep beneath the trauma of the injury. It was a detail about the post-game locker room. Chris had been talking with a reporter, a young woman who was interning for the college paper. Marcus remembered seeing her with a small, handheld recorder. She had been asking about the play, about Chris's role in the protection. Chris, ever the showman, had talked at length about the pressure, the difficult choices on the field. Marcus remembered hearing him say something chilling. You have to do what it takes to win, even if it means sacrificing your own man. It was a throwaway line, the 2 decades of doubt, and the chilling words he remembered. He didn't expect a response, but a few hours later, a reply came. It was short but to the point. I remember you. I remember him. And I remember that quote. My notes from that day are still in a box somewhere in my garage. Let me look for it. Don't get your hopes up, but I'll see what I can find. A few days later, another email arrived, this one with a single audio file attached. Marcus downloaded it, his hand shaking. He plugged in his headphones, and the crackle of static filled his ears, followed by the muffled sound of a locker room. Then, a younger Sarah Jenkins's voice. Chris, can you walk me through the final play? Some are saying your block was a little off. Chris's voice, younger and more arrogant, came through the speakers. Look, sometimes you have to make a split-second decision. We had a guy coming through, and I knew Marcus had the ball. I had to let him get the shot, had to draw the defense away. You have to do what it takes to win, even if it means sacrificing your own man. The words were exactly as Marcus remembered, but the final part of the recording, the part he had never been able to hear over the celebration, was what made his blood run cold. There was a pause, a short, almost imperceptible sound, and then Chris's voice, a casual laugh. "Hey, it worked, didn't it? He's out of my way now." The betrayal wasn't just in the words. It was in the casual tone, the cruel indifference. Chris hadn't just made a mistake on the field. He had planned it. He had sacrificed his friend, the man who had stood by him for years, for a chance at a brighter future. Marcus stared at the audio file on his screen, his heart pounding in his chest. The ghost of the past was no longer a shadow. It was a tangible, undeniable truth, and now he had the evidence to prove it. This wasn't just about winning a game anymore. This was about exposing a lie, about bringing down the man who had built his entire life on a foundation of betrayal. The game was about to get very, very personal. The cold fury. No signature. There was no need. Chris would know. Chris arrived exactly at noon, his black sedan pulling up to the chain-link fence. He stepped out, a figure of polished confidence in a tailored suit, his expensive watch catching the sunlight. He looked around the empty, dilapidated field, a sneer forming on his face. "So this is it, huh? A meeting of the ghosts of the past," Chris said, his voice laced with his usual casual cruelty. "What's the emergency, Marcus? Did you finally lose your mind and decide to confront me? I told you, honor is a fool's game." Marcus didn't reply. He held his phone up, the screen facing Chris, and hit play. The crackle of static filled the air, followed by the muffled voices from the audio file. Chris's face, for the first time in 20 years, went slack. His jaw dropped slightly, the color draining from his cheeks. The sound of his younger self, arrogant and unrepentant, filled the silence between them. "You have to do what it takes to win, even if it means sacrificing your own man." And then the final damning words. "Hey, it worked, didn't it? He's out of my way now." The recording ended. The silence that followed was deafening. Chris finally found his voice, a frantic, breathless whisper. "Where did you get that? That's a fake. It's doctored. You can't prove anything." "It's from an old journalist tape, Chris," Marcus said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "It's real, and I'm not here to get your confession. I'm here to tell you that I'm not going to the press. I'm not going to the league. This is a game between you and me, and I'm going to win it." Chris's panic was quickly replaced by a cold, calculating fury. "You think you can beat me? You have nothing. I have a winning team. I have money. I have influence. You have a bunch of kids and a grudge." "That's where you're wrong," Marcus said, a small chilling smile touching the corner of his mouth. "You think you won when you took my career? You just gave me a different path. You gave me the chance to learn." Masterpiece of calculated malice. He used his connections with the league, a network of old friends and former rivals who owed him favors. He spun a tale of Marcus's star player, a quiet but fiercely talented quarterback named Leo. Chris claimed that Leo had accepted illegal incentives to play for Marcus's team, a violation of the league's amateur rules. He had just enough fabricated evidence, a doctored email, a forged receipt for a consulting fee, to make the story believable to a committee that was already looking for a reason to keep Chris's team on top. A few days later, Marcus received the official notice. Leo was suspended indefinitely, pending a full investigation. The news hit the team like a physical blow. Practice came to a halt. The boys stood in a stunned silence, their faces reflecting a mix of disbelief and despair. "It's not true, Coach," Leo said, his voice trembling. "I swear I didn't do anything." Marcus put a hand on his shoulder, his voice a low, steady comfort.
I know, Leo, I know. This is Chris's doing. He's trying to break us.
The boys looked at Marcus, their faith in him shaken. They had bought into the story of honor and fair play, and now they were seeing the ugly reality of the world. They felt helpless, a sense of powerlessness against a force they couldn't even see. Chris wasn't on the field. He was pulling the strings from the shadows, a puppet master of betrayal. Marcus had to act fast. He knew the investigation was a sham, a legal smokescreen designed to keep Leo out of the final game. But he also knew he couldn't beat Chris in a court of law. This wasn't a legal battle, it was a psychological one. He called a team meeting, not to practice, but to talk. He didn't sugarcoat the truth.
Chris is trying to take this away from us. He's trying to steal our hope, our confidence. He's trying to make us believe we've already lost.
He held up his hand, stopping their protests.
We could fight this in court, but that's not our game. Our game is on the field, and that's where we're going to win.
Marcus looked at Leo, whose face was still a mask of shame and defeat.
Leo, your name is clean. We know that, and we're going to prove it to everyone else, not with lawyers and documents, but with our performance. We're going to...
A team. They were a brotherhood. Chris had pushed them to the brink, but he had failed to realize that Marcus had taught them how to fight from the edge. They were ready for the final, no matter the odds. The suspension of Leo was a calculated blow from Chris, a move designed to demoralize the team and prove that justice was a luxury they couldn't afford. But Chris had gravely miscalculated. Instead of fracturing the team, the injustice forged them into a more formidable unit. Marcus, however, knew that the emotional toll on Leo was far greater. The young man had lost not only his chance to play in the championship, but also his sense of self-worth. He was a quarterback without a team, a soldier abandoned on the field. Marcus found him in the gym on a Friday morning, long before the sun had fully risen. Leo was throwing a worn-out football against the wall, his movements mechanical and filled with a quiet, furious despair. He didn't acknowledge Marcus's presence, just kept throwing and catching, the rhythmic thud against the wall a metronome for his grief.
You know you're not the first person to have their dream stolen,
Marcus said, his voice soft, not as a coach, but as a man who understood the weight of that burden. Leo stopped, the ball falling from his hands. He turned, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with a bitter sadness.
It's not fair, Coach. I didn't do anything. I know,
Marcus replied, walking over and picking up the ball.
And you're right. It's not fair. But the world isn't fair, Leo. The truth is, people like Chris will always try to take your victory, but the real victory isn't on the scoreboard. It's in here.
Marcus tapped his chest, over his heart.
It's in your spirit.
He handed the ball back to Leo, not as an order, but as an invitation.
You've got two choices, Leo. You can let him win. You can let him make you believe you're a cheater. You can let him make you feel ashamed. Or you can fight back, not by crying about it, not by getting angry, but by being the kind of man he can never be.
Leo looked at the football in his hands, then at Marcus.
But I can't play, Coach. There's nothing I can do. You can do something
sharp and focused. He helped run drills, he gave pointers to the younger players, and he became the team's unofficial strategist, his knowledge of the playbook and their opponent's weaknesses proving invaluable. He found a new purpose, a different kind of strength, in the absence of his old one. Chris's plan had been to strip the team of its leader, to leave them a headless snake. But he had failed to see that Marcus had already taught them how to fight with a purpose that went beyond any single player. He had taught them to fight for each other. And Leo, the young man whose dream had been shattered, had found a way to become a champion in his own right, not on the field, but on the sidelines, leading his team to a victory that would be a testament to a soul resurrected. The air at the stadium was thick with anticipation, the late afternoon sun casting long, dramatic shadows across the field. This wasn't just a game, it was a spectacle. The championship final, Every seat was filled, the crowd a roaring tide of sound and emotion. On one side stood Chris, a vision of polished success and a sleek windbreaker, surrounded by a team of athletic giants who moved with the practiced precision of a well-funded machine. On the other side stood Marcus and his boys. They were smaller, less flashy, a group of underdogs whose unity was their greatest strength. The absence of Leo, a physical hole in their offense, was palpable. But Leo wasn't absent. He was right there on the sideline, a headset on his head, his eyes scanning the field with the intensity of a seasoned quarterback, whispering plays and observations to Marcus. The game started, and for the first quarter, Chris's team dominated. Their star players, bigger and faster, tore through Marcus's defense. The scoreboard lit up, a painful, steady increase for the opposing team. The crowd's cheers for Chris's team grew louder, mocking and dismissive. At halftime, the score was a staggering 21-0. The boys came into the locker room, their faces etched with despair. They had given everything, and it wasn't enough. The old despair began to creep back in. Marcus let them sit in the silence for a moment, letting the sting of the loss sink in. Then he stood, his voice cutting through the quiet.
You knew this was going to be hard.
Trap. Marcus's eyes lit up. It was a risky play, a move they had practiced but never used in a game. It was a gamble, but Marcus knew it was a play Chris would never see coming. It was a move born of intelligence, not brute force. "You're right," Marcus said, a grin spreading across his face. "This is our game now. We're going to play smart. We're going to play for each other, and we're going to prove that honor and a brotherhood is more powerful than any amount of money or talent." As they ran out for the third quarter, a new fire burned in their eyes. They had a plan. The first play was a stunner. They ran the reverse trap, a move that left Chris's defense completely off guard. They scored a touchdown. The crowd, a mix of disbelief and growing excitement, erupted. Chris, on the other sideline, looked confused. His playbook had been read. He had been outsmarted. The game was on. Healthily, the tipping point. The momentum had shifted. The Firehawks, fueled by a new strategy and an unwavering sense of purpose, clawed their way back into the game. Touchdown after touchdown, they proved that heart could beat brute force. The crowd, a fickle beast, had turned. They were no longer cheering for the polished champions. They were screaming for the underdogs. Chris, on the opposing sideline, was unraveling. The cool, calculated mask of confidence had cracked. He paced back and forth, yelling into his headset, a frantic, desperate figure. The game was slipping through his fingers and he couldn't stand it. He was being beaten at his own game, the psychological one, and he didn't have a plan for it. The score was now 28-21, with only a minute left in the fourth quarter. Marcus's team had the ball, on Chris's 20-yard line. This was it. One last play to win the game and settle the score. Marcus called for a timeout. He gathered the boys, their faces streaked with sweat and mud, their eyes filled with a tired but resolute fire. "This is it, boys. One last play. We're going to run the counter flicker. It's a classic, something he'll be expecting, but we're going to use it to expose him." He turned to Leo, who stood beside him, his eyes sharp and focused. Leo, it was a complete loss of control. He was completely focused on his team's mistakes, not on Marcus's strategy. The whistle blew. The ball was snapped. The Firehawks running back feigned a run to the right, drawing the defense with him. The line held, giving the quarterback just enough time to plant his feet. The quarterback faked a run, drawing in the defense. The pass was a deep spiral, arching high into the night sky, a beautiful, perfect throw. The receiver, a small but quick player, was wide open. He caught the ball and sprinted into the end zone. The stadium erupted. The final score was 28-27. The Firehawks had won. Chris stood on the field, a lone defeated figure. He had lost, not because of a bad play or a lucky shot, but because he had been outsmarted and outplayed. He had lost control, and in doing so he had revealed his true character to the entire stadium. As Marcus's team celebrated, the league official approached Chris, their faces grim. "Chris, we have a report of unsportsmanlike conduct and of a number of other things. We're going to be launching a full investigation." Chris's eyes darted to Marcus, a look of pure hatred on his face. He knew he had been beaten. He had lost everything. Not just the game, but his reputation, his career, and the respect of his community. The truth had finally caught up with him. The celebration on the field was a beautiful chaos of cheers, embraces, and tears. The boys hoisted Marcus onto their shoulders, their faces shining with a joy that had nothing to do with a scoreboard. They had won, not with a star player or a rigged deal, but with heart and with honor. Later, in the quiet of the locker room, the air was filled with a different kind of victory. Marcus stood before his team, a small smile on his face, the ghost of his past finally quieted. The old wound in his knee felt a little less painful, the phantom ache finally fading into a dull, distant memory. He looked at each of them. He looked at Leo, whose eyes were no longer filled with despair but with a quiet, fierce pride. He was a champion, not because of a touchdown pass but because he had found a new purpose, a different kind of... League official entered the locker room, his face grim. "Marcus, a word. We've reviewed the footage, the illegal contact, the deliberate push. It's all on video. Chris's team is being investigated for a number of violations. The league is considering stripping them of their titles, and the suspension of your quarterback, Leo, has been overturned. The charges were baseless." Marcus nodded, but the news didn't bring him the rush of triumph he might have expected. The real victory had already been won. The scoreboard had been a formality. The real battle had been for their souls, and Marcus's team had won it without a doubt. Later that night, Marcus sat alone on the empty bleachers, the stars a quiet audience to his solitude. Chris's victory had been a lie, built on a foundation of betrayal and deceit. His own victory had been a long time coming, but it was a truth he had finally earned. He had a career back, not as a player, but as a coach. He had a team that believed in him, and most importantly, he had found his peace. The ghost of the past was finally gone. He could finally look to the future, a man redeemed, a hero to his boys, and a winner in every sense of the word.